And we're going to review a little bit from yesterday. We were talking about the Messel pits in Germany, and kind of they took a snapshot of the middle of the Cenozoic, or early part of the Cenozoic. The, and these pits, they had this gas, the CO2 gas, that would kind of be emitted periodically, and animals would be going about their daily doings around the lake, and this gas would come out and it would suffocate them, and they would fall into the lake. And the lake was deep, and they, because there was no oxygen, their tissue wasn't preserved. Things like the hair and the bones were preserved, and then they eventually became fossilized. As time went on, you can kind of get a sense of that from the picture here of the different kind of this depicting the time. Eventually, the lake got filled in, and this material became there was like an oily the bacteria that died off became turned into oil, and fossils became fossilized. But again, it gave a snapshot of what these different creatures were like 40, 50 million years ago. And here was the pygmy horse with its 3 toes, distinct toes, no hoof. Eventually, pygmy horse evolved into the much larger mammal that exists today, that has a hoof, doesn't have individual toes. This lemur-looking monkey-type creature. Again, lemurs don't have really large heads like this, and monkeys they do have tails, but they're not nearly as long, and they don't kind of have this. You can kind of see the outline of the actual animal. It's preserved in the fossil, the hair and the kind of the image of what it looked like. So you get a really good sense. It had a opposable. This would be really good for climbing trees, getting up away from predators. There's a python. Again, this one doesn't change much at all. Like python of 50 million years ago in the middle of the Cenozoic was very similar to, or early part of the Cenozoic would have been similar to the python today. Bat. Again, you can see again, it's very clear what it is, and just incredible preservation of these different fossils, and giving us an idea how evolution has occurred over the last 40 million years since when they were preserved. The other part of the lesson we're going to be talking about is the Brae tar pits, and again, a very preservation of skeletons, not the skin and the hair wasn't preserved, but the bones were. And these are out in Los Angeles, California, and they exist right there in Los Angeles, in the city of Los Angeles. You have these tar pits. And this is kind of a depiction of what would happen to these animals and why they got preserved. And here you have I think this is the tusks of a woolly mammoth, and this is the tusk of a mastodon. But the animal would see this water on top of the tar, which again, tar is a petroleum product that is used to make asphalt, to make our roads. Again, if you add stone to it, you can lay it out, and with a little bit of pressure and force, you can turn it into stone. And what would happen is these animals would see these lakes with maybe there was a recent rain, and the water and the tar don't mix, and so the water would be on top of the tar, and they would step into the tar. Maybe they could walk 1 or 2 steps, and they would be stuck, and they couldn't get out, and they would be, with time, they would just sink further and further into the tar. And how, I'm not sure the rate that they would sink, whether they would probably would suffocate, drowning in the water, or drowning, suffocate into the tar. But their skeletons would be preserved by the tar, and if they excavate these pits, which they have, many of them have been excavated, they find these perfectly preserved skeletons. And some of the different animals that are in the pits, you see the saber-toothed tiger, which are no longer, they're extinct with their large front teeth. You had woolly mammoths with their curly tusks, and they're similar to the African it's not African elephant, the Asian elephants with their smaller ears. They're similar to those animals, or that species. Obviously, a cave bear, the larger heads than an average bear, but very similar to grizzlies and Kodiak species of bears today. This is like an armadillo, but much larger than the modern armadillo. It's related to the armadillo. Here's the American lion. It's kind of neat to think we have mountain lions and cougars. They're all related to each other. Pumas. They're rough, very similar species, if not. Like cougars and mountain lions are just different names for the same species. Here's a comparison to a African lion versus an American lion, much larger than the African lions. This is the mastodon. Again, you can see it has a straight tusk versus the curly tusks, and they both had a fur coat that would have enabled them to survive in the more northern latitudes that North America and, say, Asia, Siberia would have had. American cheetah, I was never aware that America had a cheetah. So starting to become America at one point would have looked very similar, except the mastodons and the mammoths would have had fur, but you had cheetahs, you had lions, you had bison. These were all kind of animals that had kind of a similarity to Africa's animals. Here, the camel. Again, I don't think they found beaver. I'm not sure if they found beaver in Brae, but the beaver would have been more eastern, 8-10 times bigger than the modern beaver, a couple feet tall, but able to maybe chop bigger trees down and things like that to make its dams. A couple of the points. All the species that we just looked at are all extinct, and what they believe happened was their food sources disappeared during the last ice age. Bison populations and things that these cheetahs or the lions would have hunted disappeared. Glaciers came down, and the grasslands would have been covered up by snow, and the different animals died off, and also they believe maybe the mammoths potentially were hunted by humans. They would have been a major source of food for early Native Americans, but the Africa's animals, because of its latitude, African elephant would have been able to survive there, and the snow sheets and ice sheets didn't kind of extend down into Africa. Cheetahs, they would have been able to, the ecosystems would have been able to support grazing animals, and so therefore the food sources for these lions and cheetahs were preserved, and that's why in Africa you still have these different predators and the different species of prey that exist in Africa versus North America. At one point, these two continents were connected during Pangea, and so that's why these different species existed on both continents, but weren't the ones who we just looked at weren't able to survive the most recent ice age. So this should enable you to answer the questions on for today's lesson, and hopefully that is going to be able to answer those questions, and I hope that you